Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honor to rise in this House on behalf of my constituents from Surrey North to speak to this bill, Bill C-43, the Budget Implementation Act. Mr. Speaker, given the track record of the Conservatives, it is no surprise to me that the Conservatives have moved this time allocation again on this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm lucky enough to be able to get a chance to speak on behalf of my constituents on this bill. However, I know many members from the NDP, the Liberal side, and maybe the Conservative side are not going to get that opportunity to represent their constituents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just asked a question, and I'll actually get back to that. I'm going to come back to that. But there's no possible way that a 460-page bill that contains more than 400 clauses can be adequately studied, analyzed, and debated under these types of time restrictions. But is this a surprise, Mr. Speaker? Well, I'm not surprised at all. Under this government, omnibus bills have that amend dozens of acts at a time and that are pushed through this House under time allocation are unfortunately becoming the norm. It is unfortunate to me that the government insists on following this anti-democratic process time and time again. But after 3.5 years, Mr. Speaker, I have recognized that this government isn't planning on changing its way anytime soon. Mr. Speaker, there's a whole laundry list of things in this particular bill, and they're talking about certain issues in these bills here. They're dealing with temporary foreign workers, pay-to-pay, airports, Canadian Polar Commission, EI job credit, and they're beating up on the refugees in this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk about what's important to my constituents, people that when I go back to Surrey, what people are telling me, I like talking to people, finding out what their issues are, Mr. Speaker, and none of those issues have been addressed in this particular bill. I often say that when we are on the Hill, Mr. Speaker, Ottawa's like a little bubble. I think we need to get outside of here in order to hear from what actually Canadians want. I get the feeling Conservatives are still living in that bubble because what Canadians are saying is not being addressed in this House by this government, Mr. Speaker. Surrey, I come from Surrey North, and you, Mr. Speaker, it's a very dynamic and very vibrant and fast-growing city in the Lower Mainland. I'm extremely proud to represent a portion of such a diverse and interesting city. However, Mr. Speaker, Surrey is facing many pressures and challenges that require action and assistance from the federal government to solve. Surrey is facing challenges that range from a lack of affordable housing to aging infrastructure, inadequate public transit, and serious issues around crime and poverty. Federal funding and support is sorely needed to make inroads to address these challenges in my city, Mr. Speaker. I continue to hear from my constituents what a problem the public transit system is in Surrey. And I have to agree, Mr. Speaker, and Surrey is the second largest city in British Columbia, soon to be the largest city in a number of years, and it's growing at a rate of about 12,000 to 13,000 new residents annually. As one of the fastest growing cities in Canada and the fastest growing city in metropolitan Vancouver, there is a clear need for infrastructure funding to support this growth. Public transportation is increasingly a problem for such a fast-growing city. Although the population of Surrey continues to grow at an astounding rate, public transportation has not kept pace. The SkyTrain is Surrey's most efficient public transit connection to other cities in the Lower Mainland, and as such as New Westminster, Burnaby, Vancouver. However, SkyTrain service in Surrey has not been expanded since 1994. When 3 new stations were put in, Mr. Speaker, and they are all actually in my riding. But nothing's been done since then. Mr. Speaker, 20 years later, the face of Surrey has changed dramatically, and it's well past the time that the federal government commit to funding critical infrastructure such as the expansion of public transit in Surrey. Residents of Surrey North, that's my community, Mr. Surrey, will tell you that the public transit system in Surrey is inadequate. I hear that quite often. And there are long wait times and convoluted routes to get from one point of city to another. The City of Surrey is currently working to secure funding for a light transit network that will connect different town centers in the city, as well as connect Surrey to other cities in our area, such as Langley. This is an important step forward for our city and a very important investment that is critical to ensuring that Surrey remains a livable and connected city. It disappoints me greatly to see that the budget does not allocate funding to important projects that are critical to continued growth and development of major cities such as Surrey, Mr. Speaker. Other cities across the country are facing similar problems, pressures with regards to public transit, and we hear this from the FCM on a regular basis, the lack of funding for infrastructure development, transit funding for the cities across this nation. Just last week, my colleague, the member from Parkdale High, pointed out the issues that Toronto has experienced with the transit system not keeping pace with population growth. This is not an isolated issue, Mr. Speaker. Investment in infrastructure is necessary to ensure that our cities continue to be some of the best and most livable in the world. Mr. Speaker, in terms of infrastructure, public transit is not the only issue facing my community of Surrey North. As I've mentioned many times in this House, the aging Portola Bridge is a major concern to my constituents. I have been very vocal in requesting that the federal government step in and play a role in regional infrastructure planning and development. The 76-year-old bridge, Portola Bridge, which was built for 50 years lifespan, now poses a significant safety concern. The Golden Ears Bridge and the Portman Bridge, both which feed either directly or indirectly into Surrey North, are the only tolled bridges in Western Canada, Mr. Speaker. Only tolled bridge coming into my riding in Western Canada, Mr. Speaker. Both residents of Surrey rely heavily to cross Fraser River to go to work, Mr. Speaker. The many Surrey residents continue to commute across Fraser River to go to work. The future of Portola Bridge will have a significant impact on the residents of Surrey, especially on the residents of Surrey North, as it is the last non-tolled bridge that feeds directly into our city, Mr. Speaker. I have been anxiously waiting for the federal government to commit to participating in infrastructure planning and development in the south of the Fraser region. However, this budget proves that this is not a priority for this government. Mr. Speaker, municipalities receive only 8% of the tax revenue, but are responsible for 60% of the development. This, Mr. Speaker, this equation does not add up to me, and it is clear that the federal government has a responsibility to allocate funding to regional development and infrastructure in a reasonable manner that create sustainable and livable cities. This is not being done right now, Mr. Speaker, and it is not being addressed in this budget at all. Finally, Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have, Mr. Speaker? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I hear concern about crime in my community very frequently. Residents are concerned about the impact that crime is having on our community and what is being done to reduce the amount of crime. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, this tough on crime government has not done anything to help people in Surrey North. Instead, we have seen funding for policing downloaded to municipalities. Practical and cost-effective solutions such as prevention programs are not being utilized to reduce crime. For example, research shows that community-based programs focused on gang intervention, after-school mentoring, and after-school recreation are promising in preventing crime. Programs like this are practical, cost-effective, and contribute to community building, as well as goal of reducing crime. My notion on youth gang prevention takes a similar approach, Mr. Speaker, by calling the government to provide stable, long-term funding for youth gang crime prevention and intervention programs. However, once again, I see no funding allocated to these types of common sense prevention programs that can help reduce the amount of crime in my riding of Surrey North and communities across the country. This approach, Mr. Speaker, is very problematic of Conservative government. I'm not surprised in the least that their budget is out of touch with the needs of everyday Canadian. This budget is an opportunity to truly address the needs of Canadians. However, Mr. Speaker, this government has again failed Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to wish all Canadians, right across from our country a very happy Christmas and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and be safe.